Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep, really deep into abortion laws around the world. And wow, you guys did not hold back on the research this time. A mountain of articles, studies, opinions, you named it. So we're here to roll up our sleeves and help you unpack it all.
It's a topic that really gets people fired up, and for good reason, too. We'll be exploring all sides of this, the ethics, the legal precedents, and the human impact of it all. It's a lot to untangle.
It really is. It's kind of like trying to solve a puzzle that's constantly changing shape, but that's what we're here for.
Right.
To make sense of it all. You ready for this?
Ready when you are.
Okay, so let's be real. We can't even begin to talk about this without addressing the giant elephant in the room, the one that's been making headlines all over the place, overturning Roe v. Wade in the U.S. Got to start there.
Absolutely. What happened back in June of 2022 with the Supreme Court's decision was a total game changer. This wasn't just about, tweaking a law here and there. It completely changed who gets to call the shots on this issue. We're talking about power shifting from the federal level right down to each individual state.
And that's where things get really messy, right? It's like this crazy patchwork of laws across the country. Honestly, it's tough to keep up.
That's a perfect way to put it. A real patchwork. You have some states now that basically ban abortion almost completely, while others were practically writing it into their state constitutions as a guaranteed right. So now where you live can actually determine your rights, which is, well, pretty wild when you think about it.
It's mind-boggling when you consider that, according to the research we have, 62% of Americans actually support legal abortion in most cases. It's a pretty clear majority, right? But then you dig a little deeper and see the political divide.
Right, and that's where the picture gets even more complex. That gap between Democrats and Republicans on this issue is enormous. 82% of Democrats versus 70% of Republicans. It makes you wonder what's at the root of such a stark difference.
Seriously. Is it about how we each define individual freedom? Or maybe the role of, say, religion in government? I feel like we could do a whole other deep dive just on that question alone.
We probably could fill a whole series with that. But for now, I think the most important thing for our listeners to grasp is that this isn't just some abstract debate happening in courtrooms or political rallies. This has very real, very immediate consequences for people's lives.
No doubt about it. This directly impacts women and families across the U.S.
Exactly. And it actually goes even beyond America's borders. While the U.S. might be in the spotlight right now, this is a global issue. Abortion laws are being debated, challenged, and rewritten all over the world.
It's easy to get tunnel vision on something this big happening at home, but you're right. Zooming out is key here. So where do we even start with this global perspective?
Well, if you look back over the last few decades, there has been a general trend worldwide towards more relaxed abortion laws, more access, and it's a huge but. It's not as simple as a straight line towards progress. There are some glaring exceptions out there that really highlight that.
Yeah, like what's happening in Poland, right? That seems like a pretty stark example of going against the grain.
You nailed it. Poland recently enacted some of the strictest abortion laws in all of Europe, almost a complete ban, with very few exceptions. Even in cases of rape or incest, access is severely limited.
Wow. It feels like taking a giant leap backward, especially when you see what's happening in other European countries.
And it's that very contrast that makes this such a fascinating and important landscape to explore.
Right.
Because what it tells us is that this isn't just about laws on paper. It's about history, culture, and the values that shape a society clashing with each other.
It really makes you think about that constant tension, that push and pull between what individuals believe and these bigger social structures that surround us.
You've got it. And that tension, that's where things get really interesting.
It's like we're watching this tug of war play out on a global scale. You have individual rights and autonomy on one side, and these really deep-seated societal, cultural beliefs on the other.
Exactly. And that tension leads us right to another crucial part of this whole discussion, the human rights angle.
Right, because underneath all of this, the laws, the cultural differences, everything, we're really talking about fundamental human rights, aren't we?
For a lot of people, that's the very heart of this issue. Organizations like Human Rights Watch, they're very clear about where they stand. Access to safe and legal abortion, it's a fundamental human right. They see it as essential for gender equality, even for global development.
So they're basically saying that if you deny someone a safe abortion, you're denying them the right to control their own body, their own future.
Precisely. It all comes down to this idea of bodily autonomy. Having the power to make decisions about your own body without someone forcing you or interfering. But it goes beyond just autonomy, too. They also talk about the very real health implications. Because when safe abortion isn't an option, it pushes women into dangerous situations. We're talking life or death sometimes.
That's a really good point. If you take away the safe, legal option, it doesn't mean the need goes away. It just pushes people into the shadows, and that's when things can turn tragic.
It's a critical point and a dangerous one. That Human Rights Watch report, it even pulled in some data showing a strong connection between strict abortion laws and higher rates of unsafe abortions. And that leads to serious health problems, even death.
It's a stark reminder that these aren't just abstract debates we're having. There are real lives at stake here. But just like everything else we've talked about so far, there's another side to this. We have to consider the pro-life perspective.
Absolutely. And we need to explore that viewpoint with the same thoughtfulness and respect. For people who identify as pro-life, their core belief is that life begins at conception. That's the foundation.
So from their perspective, abortion isn't about a woman's right to choose. It's about protecting what they see as a human life, the unborn child.
You got it.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who hold this view, it's not just a political stance. It's deeply personal, often rooted in their faith. It's about protecting what they believe are the most vulnerable among us.
That's a powerful belief, and it helps explain why this whole debate gets so emotional, so hard to talk about sometimes. And I think it's really important for anyone listening to remember that we're not here to take sides or judge anyone's beliefs.
I completely agree. We're here to lay out these really complex issues as clearly and honestly as we can. Our listeners can form their own opinions.
And part of understanding those complexities means looking at how these laws, no matter where you stand on them morally, affect different people in very different ways.
Right. You're absolutely right. And this is where those social and economic disparities we talked about earlier, they become impossible to ignore. One of the most concerning things about restrictive abortion laws is how they disproportionately impact communities that are already marginalized.
We're talking about low-income women, women of color, women in rural areas who might not have easy access to health care. They're the ones who often end up carrying the weight of these restrictions the most, right?
Exactly. Imagine the extra burden on someone who's already struggling to make ends meet, who may not have reliable transportation, who faces all these systemic barriers in healthcare. These women are less likely to be able to travel long distances to get an abortion in a state where it's legal. They're less likely to be able to afford it. It's a huge burden.
It creates this system where whether or not you can access what some consider a fundamental right depends on your zip code, your income level. That doesn't feel right.
Unfortunately, that's the reality we're facing.
Oh.
And the research is crystal clear on this point. When you restrict abortion, these communities are hit the hardest. It just widens the gap between the haves and have-nots.
And it goes beyond just access, doesn't it? It goes back to those real-life health consequences we were talking about before.
You're absolutely right. When safe and legal abortion is off the table, the need doesn't disappear. It just goes underground. Women are more likely to seek out unsafe abortions, which can lead to all sorts of complications, infections, hemorrhaging, even death. And who do you think bears the brunt of these risks?
It's not hard to guess. The same women who are already up against so many challenges, so many barriers in the healthcare system.
Exactly. And this is why it's so important to look at this debate through the lens of social justice, economic justice. It goes way beyond legal arguments. It's about making sure everyone has equal access to healthcare, protecting those who need it most.
It's just really heavy to think about, all those real-life consequences playing out because some people don't have the same access to safe options.
It is a harsh truth, and it shows how connected everything is in society.
Yeah.
Abortion, you can't just isolate it as this one thing. It's all tied up with poverty, with healthcare access, with racial inequality. Everything is all part of the same big conversation.
I totally agree. And speaking of big conversations, we'd be missing a huge piece of the puzzle if we only talked about laws and policies. Culture, that's a huge factor here too, right? How we see family, motherhood, all of that.
Those are right at the center of it. Think about it. Our beliefs about what a woman's role in society should be, how we value motherhood, even these traditional gender roles we grew up with, those ideas all color how we view abortion.
And it's not like those ideas stay the same either. They're always being challenged, redefined, right?
For sure. The research you sent over, it even pointed out how these traditional views, a lot of them coming from religious or cultural backgrounds, they still hold a lot of weight, even in societies that consider themselves pretty secular. Shows you how powerful those deeply held beliefs can be.
It's almost like we're trying to squeeze these ancient, ingrained beliefs into the realities of a world that's changing so fast. No wonder people get so worked up about this.
Exactly. It goes way deeper than just legal definitions or medical procedures. This is about our identities, our values, how we understand life itself even.
Makes you realize when you're having these conversations, especially with people who see things differently, approaching it with empathy, actually listening, that's everything.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's so easy to get caught up in the argument, but at the end of the day, if you want to have a productive conversation, it takes respect, especially maybe even more so when you completely disagree.
So well said. We've just scratched the surface here, obviously. But hopefully this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a more well-rounded understanding of this whole debate. The history, different perspectives from around the world, and the very real impact it has on people's lives.
That was the goal, for sure. This isn't a topic with easy answers. But if we can at least try to wrap our heads around how complex it is, acknowledge that there are many valid viewpoints out there, and remember that at the heart of it all are real human stories, then maybe, just maybe, we can start having more informed and compassionate conversations.
I love that. And those conversations are more crucial now than ever. One thing's for certain. This isn't going away anytime soon. So as you keep learning and exploring this issue, here's something I'd love for you to think about. How can we bridge these divides, create those real heart-to-heart dialogues that help us understand each other better, respect each other more? Something to chew on. And on that note, that's a wrap on another deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us.